A 9-year-old Canadian girl from Queensville, Ontario, was abducted, assaulted, and slain in October 1984. Her body was found in a wooded area of Sunderland, Ontario, on New Year's Eve of the same year. But it will only be more than 3 decades later that her perpetrator would be identified. In October 1984, Christine Jessop's father, Bob, was held custody in a detention center. On October 3rd, her mother, Janet, and elder brother, Kenny, decided to travel to the detention center to visit him. Janet thought that at 9 years old, Christine was too young to visit the detention center, so she had been left behind, on her own, at home. When Janet and Kenny got back home, Christine was nowhere to be found, and they declared her as missing. During the frantic search for the young girl, her face was on every television set and in every newspaper. Christine had plans to meet up with a friend that evening at a nearby park, but she never showed up. She was last seen buying a pack of gum at a local convenience store close to her home. 2 months later, on December 31st, her remains were found in Sunderland Brock Township, 34 miles east from her home. She had been fatally stabbed, and investigators discovered male DNA stains on her underwear. The following year, on February 14th, 1985, the police focused their attention to the family's next-door neighbor, Guy Paul Morin, after he was mentioned by Christine's mother. The police set up surveillance of the Morin home on February 19th, with 2 officers eventually interviewing him 3 days later, on February 22nd. 2 months later, on April 22nd, Morin was arrested. He was put on trial twice for first-degree slaying. The first trial began on January 7th, 1986, for which he was acquitted. However, on March 4th, the Attorney General of Ontario launched an appeal of Morin's acquittal. The Crown claimed that the trial judge had made a mistake in directing the jury about the meaning of reasonable doubt, and that the acquittal should thus be thrown out and Morin retried. The Court of Appeal agreed, and on June 5th, 1987, it ordered a new trial. Morin appealed this decision to the Supreme Court of Canada, who dismissed the appeal on November 17th, 1988. The second trial began on May 28th, 1990, and Morin was convicted 2 years later of first-degree slaying on July 30th, 1992. Immediately after Morin's conviction, a grassroots organization called Justice for Guy Paul Morin Committee was established to aid him in his search for exoneration. The committee's first objective was to help Morin to appeal his conviction and, in the meantime, to apply for his release on bail while he waited for the appeal to be decided. Morin was granted bail on February 9th, 1993. Following this decision, the committee reorganized itself as the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted, now Innocence Canada. They have decided to broaden its mandate from defending Morin to working on behalf of all wrongly convicted Canadians. It was not until January 23rd, 1995, almost 10 years after he was first arrested, that Morin was exonerated because of DNA testing that had not previously been available. Christine's real perpetrator remained unidentified until October 9th, 2020, when his DNA was linked to the crime scene using genetic genealogy. The Toronto police named the perpetrator as Calvin Hoover, who was 28 at the time of Christine's demise. The interim police chief said Hoover did have a dated criminal record. He said it had no significance for the Christine investigation and that Hoover had not previously been identified as a suspect. Hoover's DNA was linked to the crime scene using genetic genealogy. Following an autopsy, a sample of his blood was on file at the Center of Forensic Sciences laboratory in Toronto, which is what detectives used to conclusively match his DNA to the Christine Jessop crime scene. Hoover was apparently a friend of the Jessop family. In fact, the 9-year-old girl visited Hoover and his family at their home in the days prior to her going missing. Hoover even helped search for her when she disappeared. Hoover's wife was interviewed by York Regional Police the day following Christine's disappearance, while Calvin Hoover's name was mentioned more than once in the slaying case file, including when his wife told investigators that he was taking care of their kids the day of Christine's disappearance and had nothing to add to her statement. He was never actually questioned. Hoover took his own life in 2015. The police did not confirm the manner. They did, however, state that there was no foul play. Christine's family was notified of the progress made in the case. Her father, Bob, said he felt sickened by the news. He said, "As I get older, you just start wondering when things are going to happen, or if it is going to happen. Fortunately, it has happened, but it is still a bit of a shock. Quite a bit of a shock, actually." Kenny Jessop, Christine's brother, said the family is feeling stunned, but happily stunned after hearing the news. He said they are experiencing all 7 stages of grief. According to Kenny, Hoover was a friend of the family, and his wife was their father's co-worker. Kenny said in a statement, "They were our friends, and Christine and I would go down and play with their kids." He added that he remembers Hoover's wife, but not Hoover himself. Kenny said, "Even 35 years later, you think about it every day. Was it this person? From day one, I truly believed it was someone who knew our family, knew my dad was in jail, and knew that we were going to visit him that day without Christine." As for Morin, who was wrongfully convicted at the start of the case, the police went to his home personally to deliver the news. Morin said, "They said, 'We will be brief, but we just want to apologize to you about what happened to you over the years. We have found the person responsible for Christine Jessop's slaying.' The police, however, would not tell him that the real perpetrator was someone that he knew." Morin said that he is happy for the Jessop family, that they have some sense of closure. He is relieved that his name can be definitively cleared. He said, "It is something I was always expecting. The justice system failed me, but science saved me." The police have also met with Hoover's family. They were shocked and surprised when they were told the news. In September 1980, a young woman who had just gotten married to the love of her life was brutally attacked in her home. Any future she had with her husband was stripped away in one of the most brutal ways. Her family only felt that justice was served after almost 4 decades. Kathleen O'Brien Doyle was described as a very outgoing people person. She was an aspiring writer and journalist. She was that type of girl that had never met with a stranger. On September 9th, 1980, 25-year-old Kathleen was in her Ocean View, Norfolk home on Granby Street in Virginia when an intruder broke into her house. Kathleen was alone at the house as her newlywed husband, a Navy pilot, was overseas doing Navy training. Everywhere in the house, there was evidence of a violent struggle. Furniture was overturned and belongings were scattered everywhere. This evidence showed that Kathleen had fought desperately to defend herself. She was brutally assaulted, stabbed multiple times, and was left there till she succumbed to her injuries. She was slain sometime between 7:30 p.m. and midnight on the 9th, but she was not discovered until September 11th, around noon, after an inquisitive neighbor called the police after noticing that something was amiss. The most disturbing feature of the crime scene was the odd evidence left behind by the perpetrator. Kathleen had a round, burnt mark on her cheek, and there was a charred Lincoln log in the garbage. It looked like the perpetrator used fire in the process of committing the crime. Kathleen's telephone's mouthpiece had been removed, making it impossible for her to be heard if she attempted to call for assistance. The case went cold and remained that way for nearly 40 years, until 2018, when the Norfolk Cold Case Unit and Detective Jonathan Smith learned about a new method, genetic genealogy, being used to solve cold cases. The department decided to give genetic genealogy a try since there was a DNA profile on the bedsheet from Kathleen's house. The genealogy company sent Detective Smith a list of 32 names about a year later, one of them being Dennis Lee Bowman. After Detective Smith investigated Bowman, he quickly learned that he could be the person responsible for Kathleen's slaying. He had prior violent offenses in his home state of Michigan. Detective Smith began searching Bowman's name on the internet and was alarmed by the results. In May 1980, Bowman had been a suspect in an attempted slaying and assault in Michigan just months before Kathleen's slaying. Detective Smith also learned that Bowman's adopted daughter, 14-year-old Andrea Bowman, had disappeared in 1989 under mysterious circumstances. Shortly after uncovering these red flags about Bowman, Detective Smith attended a cold case conference with other departments from across the country. He quickly found a detective sergeant from the Michigan State Police and inquired about Bowman. The detective said that he knew Bowman and his family. He also stated that Bowman probably was the guy responsible for the crime against Kathleen. A court transcript from September 1980 revealed that Bowman was in Norfolk on his 2-week military drill during the time of Kathleen's slaying. Bowman's DNA was a match for the sample collected from the assault kit and bedspread at the crime scene. He was then arrested in November 2019 at the age of 70. While he was in custody, he confessed to slaying Kathleen. He also confessed to accidentally ending the life of his adopted daughter. In a jail call recording, Bowman tells his wife that he buried their adopted daughter, Andrea, in their backyard. Dennis Lee Bowman is serving life at Sussex One State Prison, and justice was finally given to Kathleen's family. In 1993, what should have been a fun slumber party would turn into a nightmare. The perpetrator would finally be revealed after a lead from a witness. On October 1st, 1993, 12-year-old Pollyanna Klaas and 2 of her friends were having a slumber party at her home in Petaluma, California. At around 10:30 p.m., an intoxicated intruder entered her bedroom, carrying a knife. He then held the girls at knife point. He told the girls he was there to do no harm and was only there for money. Polly's mother was asleep in the next room while this happened. The intruder used electrical wire to bound her 2 friends, and they were gagged with a cloth. He pulled pillowcases over their heads and told them to count to 1,000. He then kidnapped Polly and fled. In a call to 911, Polly's mother, Eve Nickel, sounded confused. Eve is heard saying during the call, apparently a man just broke into our house and took my daughter. Over the next 2 months, about 4,000 people helped search for Polly. Actress Winona Ryder, who had been raised in Petaluma, offered a $200,000 reward for her safe return during the search. While the investigators' quick response helped to identify who took Polly, their efforts did not lead them to the conclusion they were hoping for. On November 27, 1993, 2 months after Polly was abducted, Dana Jaffe was hiking with a friend on a mountain trail near her secluded home in Sonoma County. While on their hike, they discovered a man's sweatshirt, a pair of girls' red tights, and a piece of knotted white cloth. Dana said, "I thought this is maybe a crime scene." Larry Pelton, a former detective of the Petaluma Police Department, arrived at the scene and immediately thought the white cloth matched what was used to gag the girls at Polly's home 2 months prior. Further investigation proved he was right. Dana said that she recounted to the police a night back in October when she found a disheveled trespasser on her property. The encounter on file identified the trespasser as Richard Allen Davis. Davis's lengthy criminal history included a previous kidnapping for which he served time. His rap sheet had everything an offender would have on his record. He had only been out of prison for 6 months before he kidnapped Polly. Davis admitted to kidnapping and slaying Polly. He led investigators to where he left her body in a field in Cloverdale, a town roughly 50 miles from Petaluma. After the detectives recovered Polly's body and a long and tumultuous trial, Davis was convicted on June 18, 1996, of first-degree slaying with 4 special circumstances: robbery, burglary, kidnapping, and attempted lewd act on a child, which made him eligible for the end-of-life penalty. At his formal sentencing, Davis provoked national outrage by taunting his victim's family and extending both middle fingers at a courtroom camera. In his final statements to the court, Davis made a bizarre comment, saying, "I would also like to state for the record that the main reason I know that I did not attempt any lewd act that night was because of a statement the young girl made to me while walking her up the embankment. Just do not do me like my dad." This prompted Polly's father, Mark Klaas, to lunge at Davis, which then got Mark escorted out of the courtroom. Former FBI Special Agent Eddie Fryer said, "He made those statements to Mark just to be malicious and hurtful to a father who just lost his daughter." Judge Thomas Hastings then formally sentenced Davis to the end-of-life penalty, telling Davis that his conduct in the courtroom made the decision to pass this sentence significantly easier. Polly's father said, "It makes me so angry, it really does. I am still dealing with major anxieties 30 years later." Davis remains on the end-of-life sentence, as capital punishment was suspended by the governor of California in 2019, according to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Polly's body was cremated and her ashes were spread over the Pacific Ocean by her friends and family. Mark Klaas has spent the last 30 years advocating for families who have missing children. In 1994, he founded Klaas Kids, now known as the Polly Klaas Foundation, an organization whose professional search and rescue team has assisted in finding missing people for more than 1,500 families. However, Mark recently announced that his organization will cease its efforts in 2024. He said, "We have been doing it for 30 years. I am 74, and I do not want to be doing this for the rest of my life." Mark said that he wants to take some time for himself and focus on the lasting memory of his daughter, Polly. Polly would have been 42 this year. The town of Petaluma has memorialized her through the Polly Klaas Community Theater. Mark said, "She wanted to pursue acting. That is what she wanted to do, and she was pretty good at it. She was really coming into her own as a human." A 32-year-old woman, Michele Whitaker, disappeared after being dropped off at a truck stop. After false evidence, the breakthrough finally came 6 years later in the form of a telephone call. Michele was one of 5 children and was very close to her entire family. Michele's mom, Laura Andrews, said that she was a very happy kid until they moved to Gastonia, North Carolina, when she was 15. When Michele became a teenager, she and her mother started to clash. Michele believed her mother was too strict, and that made Michele rebel. Michele considered joining the Navy, but she fell in love with her recruiter instead. He was about 6 to 8 years older than her. After graduating high school, she married this man, but their marriage did not even last 1 full year. According to Michele's mom, Laura, the marriage was awful, and Michele had to get out. After her divorce, the family moved to Spartanburg, South Carolina. By the time Michele was 30, she was struggling. She worked part-time as a waitress, but was barely getting by. One night after work, Michele was offered a ride home by a man she just met, named David. David assaulted and beat her, leaving her face badly bruised. David was then arrested, and he pleaded guilty to assault and battery, and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. No matter what Michele did, she felt as if she could not get her life together. She bounced around from her parents' home to friends' houses, and sometimes even slept in her car. Michele was arrested for drunk driving, for which she had to complete a jail sentence. She was mistakenly released from jail instead of attending court-ordered treatment for substance and alcohol abuse. On August 5th, 2002, Michele got into an argument with her mom. Laura was not sure where Michele went after that, but received a call a few days later from the man that Michele had been staying with. He said that he had not seen Michele in a few days. Laura was very worried and contacted the police, but they told her that Michele was an adult and there was not much they could do. Laura had a sergeant friend from the neighborhood who also knew of Michele's transient lifestyle. He told Laura that Michele would most likely turn up soon. No one in Michele's life had seen or heard from her for about 2 weeks, and on August 21st, 2002, an official missing persons report was filed. The police obtained Michele's bank records, but there was no activity on her account. The police spoke to Michele's ex-husband, but ruled him out immediately. They talked to her family, co-workers, and people she was known to have spent time with. The police did discover that a man named Brad Wines was the last known person to have seen Michele on August 16th, 2002. Brad and Michele met at a local pool hall, where he said they hung out for a few hours and left to drive around on his motorcycle. Brad said that he dropped Michele off at a truck stop the next morning. He told the police that Michele was hoping to go to Myrtle Beach. He did not know where Michele went after he dropped her off. To make sure Brad was telling the truth, he took a polygraph test which he passed. Michele's family created a missing person flyer that they handed out at the truck stop, hoping someone would recognize her. However, no one had seen her. About a year into Michele's disappearance, the case went cold. Laura begged local TV stations to keep Michele's case alive in the news. In August 2005, about 3 years after Michele disappeared, the police received an anonymous letter. The author said that they knew where Michele's body was and had drawn a map. It said that Michele was near the water's edge, near tall pines, and at the edge of the pond. The location was only 25 miles from the truck stop where Michele was dropped off. The police spent 2 days searching the area, but they did not find anything. It was apparent that the letter was a hoax, and DNA confirmed that the letter had been written by a woman. The police eventually told Michele's family about the letter. They were disgusted that someone would create that and give them false hope. 2 months later, in October, another case made the headlines. A man named Jonathan Vick was arrested for the assault and slaying of Dana Satterfield, a beauty salon owner. Dana was brutally slain in her salon. The salon was located about 12 miles from where Michele was last seen, and suspicions fell on Jonathan because it was rumored that he had been a customer at the diner where Michele worked. Jonathan had a connection to Dana because his mom, Mary Ann Vick, had been one of her customers at the salon. Jonathan was also a suspect in the disappearance of his ex-girlfriend, Heather Sellers, who also worked as a waitress at a Waffle House at the time of her disappearance. There was never any hard proof that Jonathan had a connection to Michele. In November 2006, Jonathan Vick was convicted of kidnapping, criminal sexual conduct, and slaying. He was sentenced to life plus 60 years. He was never charged in connection to the disappearances of Michele or Heather. Michele's family held a vigil for her after 5 years of being missing. Laura also created a webpage with pictures of Michele throughout many years of her life. In August 2008, a woman called the police. Lieutenant William Gary answered the call. The woman on the other end said that Michele Whitaker was alive and living in Oregon. The woman had seen Michele's case on an episode of Forensic Files, as well as the webpage that Laura had created. She recognized Michele as the woman who was living with her friends. The woman wanted to prove that she was telling the truth, so she sent a photo of Michele to Lieutenant Gary. The Spartanburg police contacted the Oregon State Police. An officer went to the home where Michele was living, and Michele confirmed that she was indeed Michele Whitaker. Michele's fingerprints also confirmed she was the missing woman. Laura finally received the phone call she had been hoping for every day for the past 6 years. Her daughter, 38-year-old Michele Shelley Whitaker, has been found alive and well after disappearing. The police told Michele that her family had been searching for her for 6 long years. Michele said that she was tired of living the way she was living. After the fight she had with her mom, she drifted around and decided that her family would be better off without her. She originally wanted to go to Myrtle Beach and get a job, where she would be paid under the table. Michele met Brad on her last night in Spartanburg and convinced him to drop her off at the truck stop. She said she caught a ride and ended up in Las Vegas, California, and eventually Oregon. Michele claimed that she used her real name and did not know that her family was searching for her. She said she has a lot of guilt for what she did to her family and for having the police spend money and resources looking for her. Michele is closer than ever to her family, especially to Laura.